Welcome to the July edition of This Month in Payroll. I'm Claire Socio, a partner in PwC's Payroll Advisory and Operations practice. This month we will focus on a flyover of payroll changes now in place for this financial year, new gender equality targets, and recent developments relating to lump sum or loaded payments. Let's start with a flyover of payroll changes that took effect from 1 July 2025 and consider the implications for both payroll and HR operations to ensure a smooth transition. As discussed in detail last month, the Fair Work Commission's annual wage review delivered a 3.5% increase to both the national minimum wage and all modern award rates. Payroll systems should already be updated to reflect the new minimum rates from the beginning of the relevant pay period. Now is an appropriate time to test that these new rates, as well as any changes to loadings or allowances, are being calculated and paid at the expected rates. Annualised salaries should also be reviewed to ensure that any buffer is sufficient to compensate for the actual hours worked. And employers with enterprise agreements should check that base rates remain compliant with the new minimums and ensure any changes to rates which take effect on a different date, for example on the anniversary date of the agreement, are identified and planned appropriately. From 1 July, the high income threshold increased from $175,000 to $183,100. Employees earning above this amount are generally excluded from unfair dismissal protections, unless they're covered by a modern award, and are also exempt from the prohibition on fixed-term contracts exceeding 2 years. The threshold is also relevant to determining whether an award-covered employee who accepts a guarantee of annual earnings above this threshold is considered to be a high-income employee such that the relevant award does not apply. Employers should review arrangements to identify any employees whose guarantee of annual earnings no longer exceeds the new threshold. An increase may need to be applied, or award entitlements provided, if an employee no longer qualifies as a high-income employee. Employers should also update HR policies and contract templates to align with the new limits and educate managers on the implications for contract renewals and terminations. The superannuation guarantee rate increased to 12% per annum, marking the final step in the legislated SG rate rises. The concessional contributions cap remains unchanged at $30,000 for the financial year ending 30 June 2026, so the maximum super contribution base has decreased to $62,500 per quarter. Payroll software should already be updated to apply this 12% SG rate from 1 July. Employers should also make sure that contributions do not exceed the new maximum base per quarter, and that these changes are communicated to employees, especially higher earners who may be affected by the lower contribution base. Where a total remuneration approach is adopted, you should review the payroll setup for these employees to ensure the correct superannuation obligations are being administered. From 1 July, the federal government's paid parental leave scheme increased from 22 to 24 weeks, with a further increase to 26 weeks scheduled for July 2026. Importantly, the ATO will now make superannuation contributions at the new SG rate of 12% on government-funded parental leave. These contributions, including interest, will be made as a lump sum at the end of each financial year. Parental leave policies and employee communications should be updated to reflect the increased leave entitlements. And while it's the ATO who is responsible for the super payments, employers should help to communicate this process and be prepared to answer any related employee queries. The tax-free limit for genuine redundancy payments increased to $13,100 plus $6,552 for each completed year of service. Any amount above this limit is treated as an employment termination payment and is taxed accordingly. Redundancy calculations are often managed through calculation templates and supporting manual processes. So in addition to testing that the payroll system itself is applying the new tax-free limits, it is important to make sure that any updates are also made to supporting documentation and templates. And lastly, specific to the community services sector, portable long service leave was introduced in New South Wales effective 1 July, and will be introduced in South Australia from 1 October this year. This will bring these states in line with Victoria, Queensland and the ACT, which already have similar arrangements for community services workers. Employers in this sector need to ensure that the obligations of this scheme are well understood and met. Robust processes are needed to determine eligibility, to register the business and record the service of relevant workers, to comply with reporting obligations, and to calculate and administer levy contributions and payment of entitlements. Long service leave more generally continues to be an area of focus for state-based regulators, and all employers are encouraged to consider a proactive review of their compliance. Now to developments which expand the existing Workplace Gender Equality Act, or WGEA, reporting obligations. Under these new requirements, organisations with 500 or more direct employees in Australia need to select and report on gender equality targets over a 3-year cycle. The aim being to drive measurable progress across the 6 gender equality indicators, from representation and pay equity to flexible work and safety from harassment. There is an opportunity for employers to distinguish themselves by accelerating and promoting progress in gender equality. Conversely, failing to meet or make satisfactory progress against targets will make an employer non-compliant with the Act and can lead to reputational damage and ineligibility to tender for certain Commonwealth procurement. Payroll should be working hand in glove with the team responsible for WGEA submissions. Confidence in the completeness and accuracy of underlying data, much of which is owned by Payroll, will be critical when selecting the appropriate targets and defining the associated commitments. So let's break down in a little more detail what will be required. Relevant employers must select and commit to achieving 3 gender equality targets from a prescribed menu of 19 numeric and action targets which are defined within the legislative instrument. At least one target must be numeric, meaning it is quantifiable and measurable, usually with reference to a percentage point improvement across time. The action targets focus on improving policies, practices, and actions in the workplace. Guidelines are in place to ensure that an action isn't chosen if it commits to doing something that is already in place. Employers will disclose their selected targets when they report to WGEA in early 2026. Those selections will be published by WGEA and progress will be measured each year thereafter. Employers will then have 3 years to meet or demonstrate progress against the chosen targets. And note that the targets cannot be changed within that 3-year cycle, so they must be chosen carefully. The targets align to data that employers already report to WGEA. The 2026 report, which reflects the 2024-25 reporting period, will set the baseline against which annual progress will be measured and achievement is ultimately assessed. This initiative isn't just about compliance. It's an opportunity for organisations to lead on equity, attract and retain talent, and foster inclusivity. We recommend that you start preparing by evaluating your current state before selecting and setting meaningful, evidence-based targets for the next 3 years. As I highlighted earlier, accurate workforce data will be essential for setting baselines, monitoring progress, and informing decisions about any adjustments to stay on track. Early and transparent communication with employees, unions, and other stakeholders will be vital to build trust and ensure buy-in. Take the opportunity to integrate your selected targets into your FY26 WGEA employer statement. And of course, oversight at the senior executive level is a requirement, so clarity about the governance structure and frequency of stakeholder engagement is critical. Now to 2 recent federal court decisions and a subsequent appeal by the Fair Work Ombudsman that consider the interpretation of associated working time by casual academic staff in the higher education sector. The Higher Education Industry Academic Staff Award allows for the payment of lump sum lecturing and tutoring rates to sessional or casual academics. These rates are designed to cover both the direct delivery of the lecture or tutorial and a notional amount of associated work. The payment of these lump sum rates has been common practice in the sector for many years and is intended to reflect the practical realities of academic work, while also providing a simplified and predictable method of paying casual academics. The award prescribes the number of additional hours that are expected to form the associated working time, taking into account both delivery of the lecture or tutorial, as well as preparation, marking, student consultation, and incidental administration. So you might already be wondering, in practice, where does this start and end? And it is the boundaries of this associated working time that was considered in two decisions over the past month. One found in favour of the university and allowed a broader interpretation of the associated working time, whereas the other found in favour of the union representing employees. In Torrens University against the Fair Work Ombudsman, the Ombudsman issued a compliance notice to Torrens Uni, alleging that marking assessments that are not directly linked to a specific lecture should be paid at the separate marking rate and not included in the lump sum lecturing rate. In this case, the marking in dispute was performed in week 13 of a 12-week lecture trimester. The Federal Court rejected the Ombudsman's narrow interpretation. It instead upheld the Uni's argument that associated working time includes the marking of all assessments relating to the content taught by the lecturer, and is not limited to marking directly related to a single lecture. By contrast, the separate marking rate should apply where the academic is marking work for subjects they did not teach. The court acknowledged that the award structure assumes notional or indicative time allocations that may not always reflect the actual time spent, but considered this a feature of the industrial instrument and not a compliance failure. Relevantly, the Fair Work Ombudsman has already lodged a notice of appeal in relation to this decision, so we will continue to monitor any further developments. The separate decision in National Tertiary Education Union against Monash University centred on sessional teachers at Monash who were required to hold consultation sessions for students, often on the same day as their tutorials. This dispute considered an enterprise agreement rather than award, but it was again the boundaries of a lump sum rate that were being challenged. Monash argued that associated work for the lump sum tutorial rate should include consultations within a week before or after a tutorial, whether scheduled or not. The NTEU, in turn, argued that scheduled consultations were a separate obligation that should be paid at a separate and higher rate. This time, the Federal Court found in favour of the NTEU. It held that incidental, ad hoc consultation with students before or after tutorials is associated work and therefore included in the tutorial rate. However, separately scheduled consultation hours, where staff are required to be available at set times and places, are not. So what lessons can we draw from these decisions for all employers? As with bundled arrangements such as loaded rates or even annualised salaries, you should never set and forget a composite or lump sum payment. The boundaries of these arrangements, including exactly what type of work is included and any timeframes within which it must be performed, will ultimately be determined by the specific wording of the relevant industrial instrument. It's therefore essential that when bargaining, employers are clear and unambiguous as to what is included in and excluded from any bundled arrangement, and that this is mutually understood by both the employer and workers. Ongoing monitoring and record keeping is critical to ensure alignment with actual work allocations and practices, and compliance with the underlying instrument obligations. The topic of annualised salaries remains under the spotlight. Draft legislation has been tabled to prohibit these arrangements from absorbing penalty rates and overtime otherwise provided in an award if an employee would be left worse off. And we're expecting a long-awaited federal court decision to be delivered on the 22nd of August, in which the respondents relied on an annualised salary to satisfy or offset obligations under an award. More to come on these developments next month. Before we close, I'm pleased to advise that registration is now open for our next Workforce Leaders Forum on Wednesday, 20 August 2025. The advancement of AI brings opportunities, but also comes with uncertainties and change. So what does the rise of AI signify for payroll functions and operational delivery in both the short and long term? At this virtual event, we will host a panel discussion with PwC Australia's workforce specialists, where we will dive into the tangible impacts and possibilities AI presents for payroll operations and the broader hire-to-retire process. I look forward to you joining us then to explore this significant topic. Please register using the link on your screen. And that's it for our July edition of This Month in Payroll. If you would like to visit any of our prior updates, they're available on our website at pwc.com.au/payroll. And if you have any questions or need for support, please reach out to me or your usual PwC contact. Until next time, have a great month in payroll.